Coming up on FTC Recap, Nick and Peyton from AndyMark are here to discuss all things PowerPlay, including impressions of the game, game design, and to talk more about what AndyMark brings to the table for FTC this season. Let's get ready for FTC Recap.
This video on First Updates Now is made possible by viewers like you and also the following sponsors. Solidworks is free for first teams. Over 80% of U.S. engineering schools and 370,000 plus companies use Solidworks to design great products. Solidworks can help you design a great robot on desktop or on the cloud. Go to solidworks.com/first to register your team. Apply the skills you gained as a first student or mentor and help change the world at Stryker. Stryker is the top career choice for many of those in FIRST because of their commitment to innovation and saving lives. Learn more about the incredible culture at Stryker and view their thousands of positions available around the world at careers.stryker.com.
Welcome to Fun FTC. It's kickoff day, and we've got a breakdown of the new game. For First Updates Now, I'm a boss.
And I'm Saha. Joining us today from AndyMark is Nick and Peyton. Nick is a mechanical systems designer, and Peyton is a mechanical engineer from AndyMark. Welcome to the show, and thank you both for joining us.
Yeah, before we get started, Nick and Peyton, do you guys just want to talk about a little bit like what you do at AndyMark, how long you've been there, those types of things?
Sure. So I've been at AndyMark since 2014. My primary day job has been working on products for first robotics competition robots, so the bigger robots, compliant wheels, get a parts chassis, timer in a box, all came across my desk. But the last year and a half or so, I've been working a lot on the mechanical design for the First Tech Challenge game fields as well.
Yeah, so I actually started interning back in high school. Now I'm working full-time since about May. And I primarily do the FTC design stuff for products.
Wow, yeah, that's really awesome. And before we get into the game design, let's talk about first impressions of the PowerPlay game. Nick and Peyton, what excites you guys most about the game?
My favorite part about this game is that the entire playing field is the scoring board. It's not one localized small area of the field where all the action's happening. It's the entire field. That's my biggest takeaway for this game.
As a state FTA for Indiana for most years, I like having a field that I can be able to assemble or disassemble pretty easily and not have to spend too much work trying to fit it in a car to take to the next event.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And, with that, I think overall the PowerPlay game is a very unique challenge with the new cone elements. I personally think this is probably one of the most strategic games we've seen yet. Not only with the circuits, but just with like all of the scoring options, and it really doesn't seem like they're not valuable at all, and things like that. In the past we've seen teams just always go for the high goal or always go for the top goal with ultimate goal, and it's like teams are always just aiming for the highest level. But I think that may not be the case with this game. And teams can score on a variety of junctions, which are all around the field. There are ground, low, medium, high junctions, all increasing in points value. And teams, as I said before, must control the cones found in the substations or the cone stacks and place them on top of junctions. In Endgame, one of the coolest things is seeing the alliances try to make circuits. I think that'll be really, really interesting to see how the strategy for that adapts throughout the season. Right now people are saying like 4 junctions, like going straight across 4 junctions is the fastest or shortest route to make a circuit, but we'll see like as strategy evolves and teams are trying to block the alliance from making them, how that'll progress. And I think with the entire game essentially being focused on the cones and junctions, it'll be interesting to see like how teams optimize their robots leading up to the World Championship, because even last year, like everyone was saying like, oh, ducks are like such a small part of the game, but then we saw teams like Wolfpack Machina and Clueless and even like Pixelated, who spent so much time and so much energy optimizing their duck depositing mechanism so that they could score ducks while they were spinning them off. And they definitely spent a lot of time on that, just as much as they did with the freight. And Sahil, what do you think about the autonomous period?
Yeah, so for the autonomous, it's definitely going to be interesting to see because there's a lot of obstacles on the field, and you kind of really have to make sure you don't like just run into something and just get stuck there, because everything relies on all the game elements on the field. So you got to make sure you go to the right spot, avoid each and every single pole, And I think it's gonna be interesting seeing like how you have to incorporate every game element on the field, and you can't just focus on one thing, like you mentioned before.
Hmm. And Nick and Peyton, do you guys see any like? How do you guys think like auto like collisions will happen, or like if they'll happen more frequently, or not at all, or like what teams will do to get past that?
I think overall teams are probably going to do what they normally do, where you get into an alliance and you say, hey, I've got an auto that's generally going to run in this quadrant of the field, and hopefully you've got an auto that runs in a different quadrant. And I think in auto, most teams are probably going to try to stay away from each other, since there's a cone stack on either half of the field for them to pick from.
Yeah, and then what do you think about like those really, really top level teams that are gonna like try and go for that high junction that's the closest to the cone stacks, and you're gonna have one red and one blue row while going for the same junction. How do you think that'll work out between teams?
I think that's going to be fun. I mean, trying to do a little bit of the dance of setting little bits of delays, and trying to scout your opponents and seeing how fast they can cycle. And you could be cute and you could try to offset those cycles. That probably will end in tears. And you probably are going to have to adapt, and I don't know, play the game of chicken on whether or not you're going to go spam the medium one instead to guarantee some points. I'm excited for that.
Yeah. And let's talk a little bit about the teleop period. As I said before, we have the 4 different junctions, with the ground junction being 2 points per cone, the low being 3, middle being 4, and finally the high junction being 5. And I think another part of this game that's really important to talk about is the human player. We didn't see the human player last season, or we did with the Ducks, but not as much as we saw in Ultimate Goal and Skystone and those years. And I think what I'm interested in seeing is like how teams optimize their human players, because I remember in Skystone at the beginning, everyone was like, "Oh, you're just placing stones on the field. How does it really matter?" And then by the time we got to the last state championships in like February, March, I was seeing human players like spending all of their time like trying to figure out which are the flattest stones, what's not going to topple over that stack, and then giving those to the team. So seeing how human players do something like that, maybe optimizing where they place it on the field, or how to, making sure they really, really don't tip them over or anything like that. It'll be really interesting to see how that plays out in the teleop period. What do you guys think?
Yeah. So what I'm thinking, like, since those poles have like a spring, what I'm worried about is like later in the game when everyone starts filling up those poles. If if someone like hits it or runs into it accidentally, and it just like launches everything off, that's gonna be like a really odd play. But at the same time, if a cap flies, then it's gonna go flying like really, really far. So I'm wondering what will happen in those situations.
Yeah. And, Nick and Peyton, one question I have for you guys is, how tall do you think we'll see these cone stacks getting by like Worlds off season, late into the game?
So I think teams are going to discover as they get their field elements this week that all of the junctions have a capacity, a practical capacity, where obviously they have enough height to hold, like 20 something cones. But as the center of mass of the entire stack gets higher, it becomes a lot easier for the stack to not return to center, intentionally so that it looks like there's more space. So I think teams are going to find a practical limit of like around, at most on a single stack, like 13 cones or so.
And you're talking about the high junction with the 13.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. The other junctions have different practical limits, but I don't see any individual stack by the time teams play with their elements going anywhere past 10, which means teams will have to go and find a new place to put their cones, because there's a practical limit on this playing field.
Sure. And Peyton, one question I have for you regarding the teleop is, do you think teams will run out of cones this year? Like, do you think we'll have something like Relic Recovery, where we saw in some specific matches in North Super Regionals and Worlds, where you had just 4 teams sitting around on the field just waiting on the balancing stones? Or, do you think this will be like going to the last possible second, stacking?
I think it definitely depends on your region. Here in Indiana, normally it's pretty slow to start. So I think we'll probably see like an average robot doing maybe 3 or 4 cones in a match, just because of where we're at. I think at the higher levels of play, you could run out of cones, but I think there's a certain strategy element about not running out too early. as to not leave openings for your opponent to place on top and take ownership away. It's kind of like the beacons. You didn't want to just spend all your time pressing beacons back in Velocity Vortex. You kind of wanted to press them at the right time. So I think teams probably can run out of cones if they're only worried about scoring them the entire time. But it'll be interesting to see how teams react to the game and play strategically.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
let's not talk.
go ahead.
Yeah, let's not talk about the end game, because I think by far this one's probably the most creative for coming to end game, because it really has a lot of different parts at play, like owning the junctions, which one has the blue or the red at the top. You have to really like go around the field to do that. Then the beacons, you have to make sure you have the right ones for additional points. And how do you guys feel about that, really?
I like it. I mean, to me, it has some of the positive aspects of some previous first games, like spoiler tubes from Rack and Roll, where you have this new game element at the end that like has a very direct impact on the total match score, without it being like a subtractive score for your opponent. I'm a huge fan of that, where here's a swing thing, it's a similar action, and you can lock in some points on an ever-changing playing field. I think there's gonna be a game of chicken on that one, of like, I want to guarantee I got my own pole, or I want to block out my opponents with this cap. Like, I don't know, it's gonna be down to the wire in that end game.
Yeah, and one thing we saw last season with like sort of everybody gravitated towards that like red solo cup design, or just like cup design for the team scoring element, for the capstones in Great Frenzy. Do you guys think we'll see like some sort of design convergence with that, or it'll be like super unique with everyone else and just like trying to have fun with their design?
I like seeing the different designs that teams come up with, because they're usually fairly creative. I think one of the things about the FTC season being as long as it is by the time we get to Worlds, somebody has usually come up with something really, really clever, and teams are able to iterate off of that kind of idea. So potentially, I think we could see something, but I think one of the things about last year is you needed two team design things to kind of stack on top of each other, and this year you only really want to put one item on each cone or each pole. So
yeah, and I think another thing about like the whole design convergence thing, the game manual this year does say that a robot may score at most one beacon per match. So it's not really like a question of like, oh, I need to make sure like the other team, or that I can score the other team's beacon as well as mine, because like 99% of the time you're going to be scoring your own beacon, and that's all you can do in the match. So I think that should hopefully like result in some more creative solutions instead of everyone like trying to do like the same cup. Yeah, and before we talk about the game design and more with Nick and Peyton, let's bring on our producer Tyler to talk about one of our show sponsors and to start our first giveaway.
Hey, thanks, Boss. Yeah, let's start our first giveaway. Of course, we're going to do a couple AndyMark giveaways, so that would make sense, right? So our first set here from our friends at AndyMark is going to be for the 2-inch compliant wheels. These are the 8mm bore 35 diameter greens, and they're giving away 6 of them today. Nick and Payne, I should just have you guys read off all this stuff about it. But a little bit more, these are the original compliant wheels, which Nick mentioned before. Nick, you were a big person behind the compliant wheels, right? Were you the main designer on it?
Yeah, that's correct. Many years ago, they all come across my desk.
Awesome. So if you're interested in winning this, by the way, of course, they're intended to move objects and give way to allow rigid objects to be manipulated easy. So if you're interested in winning this, type green in chat. Very creative. Green is the keyword. Type that in chat. Don't forget, you need to be following the channel in order to be eligible to win, and our subs do get some extra luck. So we'll draw for that in just a little bit. Once again, green is the keyword in chat. And by the way, let's give a big shout out and thanks to our friends at Striker Careers, who apparently I can't bring up the right screen for. There we go. Our friends at Striker Careers, who are celebrating 80 years of making healthcare better. Hey, if you want to work for a company that is a leading medical manufacturing technology company out there, Striker right now is looking for interns and co-ops for 2023 summer. So right now, if you're interested in doing that, follow us when they do the big recruitment for that. Head on over to careers.stryker.com and click the Join Our Talent Network button where you can sign up and get notified when positions are opening, or get in direct contact with Corey, who's our big fan out there on an FRC team, who will get you hooked up and let you know more about what you need to know to sign up for a co-op or internship. Once again, careers.stryker.com. ryker.com. Thanks again to Striker for keeping fun, loud, live, and independent. We'll draw for the compliant wheel in just a couple minutes too.
Yeah. All right, Saho.
Yeah, so let's talk about our game design. First off, what does AndyMark think to do for the game design in relation to?
Yeah, so there's two kind of separate entities that work together. So there's a volunteer group of a games committee that, longtime volunteers, firsters that do a lot of like the brain cooking and get to a concept phase, and then they bring in AndyMark, and the first check is this manufacturable? And we do some preliminary analysis of what their concept is, and basically come up with it costs this much, is manufacturable, yes, no, and kind of work together from there with a core tenant concept, or multiple. Some years depends on what the game is, to bring that GDC's dreams to reality. And it's a basically a year-long process to go from that state to a final product in team's hands, which is an absolute blast for sure. We love working with them. It's really fun to see how the games evolve from first initial read-in meeting, like, hey, this is the core tenets, this is what we think the game piece should be, this blah blah blah, to stuff coming in the door for the first time.
Yeah, and speaking of like how the game evolved, even though the game is very fresh, like it was just released a couple of days ago, I'm really interested to know like what other things you guys were considering about this game, or like what changes were made. Was there anything that you think really improved the game, or will force teams to think of new strategies? Maybe something like the springs or what have you.
There's a whole pile of these, so I could talk forever about it. One of them is the springs is a big deal. Early on in the game's development, one of the ideas was for every junction to have the same base. This is a 3D printed one from early in development. Some of them would have poles in them, some of them wouldn't. And our intent back then was they'd be attached so well that they couldn't be pulled off. And this got removed for two reasons. One, we actually found it was a little bit damaging to the tiles when we were testing this, but two, cost honestly was a barrier for this one. And going to the springs actually allowed for it was not original concept of this game, but a new challenge where the goal might not exactly be in the same spot every time, and also admittedly keeps the poles from being pulled out of the tiles. That was kind of one of the big advents of this game. Let's see. This is not the game that was started with. Probably one of my favorite improvements is one of the concepts of this game when it was presented to us had a smaller kind of scoring board playing field in the center of the field with smaller scoring elements, a lot more of them. But it was still the same tenet of, connect them to thing and own as many spots as you can, like the same core tenets, just executed differently. And switching to the poles and using the whole playing field basically makes the game a lot more accessible, not only to play because it uses the whole playing field, but to watch. Instead of having to see this play field that's kind of small, far away, everybody can see what's going on with the whole playing field having these large gamelons everywhere. Was probably the biggest swing in that concept. In that concept phase. And I don't know, that one really kind of set the course there once that idea happened in that group.
Yeah, and Peyton, how did the design of the cones evolve or change throughout the season or through the game design cycle, or has that been pretty constant the whole time?
So by the time I had joined on, most of that was kind of already a solved problem. Some of the neat things about them are obviously, if you take a look at the inside, there's ribs on the inside, and that is specifically designed to help make sure that the cone doesn't get stuck on the top of a pole. Some of the neat things are, looking through some of the notes, are the height of the bottom is kind of important because it helps referees and people keep score throughout the match, because they can easily see if there's a blue cone there, a red cone there, if there's two blue ones stacked on top of each other, how many are there actually there? So it's little things that you don't initially think of when you look at it, but then you try to think of field crew, will they pulling these apart or stacking these or putting them somewhere? So I think it's kind of those hidden features of the cone.
Yeah, for sure. It did evolve a lot. I've got a whole pile of them in front of me. We started with, simple cut-up polyethylene like soccer cones that were really flexible. But the biggest core tenet with a lot of the early concepts we had was what Peyton mentioned. Cones getting stuck against each other was like feels bad for everybody, and thought to be too difficult of a challenge for the robots to solve, especially when a lot of the concepts of this game had stacks of cones everywhere. So like the core tenet of the design of this cone is such that they cannot get stuck together whatsoever. So that drove a lot of it. So we started from there, and the piles of 3D prints in different shapes, anything from something that looked kind of like this that had a smaller lip, still had some ribs inside to kind of keep them from, getting stuck together, to, I don't know, a bunch of different iterations rather quickly that ended up being this shape. And most of the things we kind of played with, I don't know if the camera will show it, but different shapes and counts of the ribs inside. Because one of the things we didn't want is we didn't want the cones to ever really get stuck, at least frequently, on the top of a pole. So this particular one really got stuck pretty easily.
So for like intake and cloth designs, how do you guys feel about in relation to the cone? Which one would work more successfully?
I say that's kind of a interesting one, because one of the things that the cone poses in relation to some of the other ones is got a taper to it. So some of your normal pickup devices that have to deal with the outside of the cone may struggle on these tapered sides just because it's not a uniform diameter. So those are things to consider. And so maybe you want some compliance in a system. Maybe you want it to be super rigid so it can apply a lot of force. So it'll be interesting to see all the different ways teams can come up with a solution that may or may not have seen in FTC before.
Yeah, and Nick, you were talking a lot about the insides of the cones. Do you think teams will be grabbing it from the inside? I mean, was that something that the GDC and AndyMark thought about or discussed, and did that influence the design of them at all?
Yeah, we definitely did talk about it when designing the cone. Admittedly, probably not. The gaps on the bottom rim are pretty small; it's hard to align to. And the top is, the inside surface is pretty smooth and kind of hard to grab to. I can see teams maybe like contemplating supporting here as they write cones, but admittedly, no. The intent was that this is a game piece that's either grabbed, from the side here, grabbed from the top, or grabbed on this, this ring at the bottom. Was really the expected and intended, interaction with the cone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty cool. And I think we've talked a lot about the cones. Let's talk a little bit more about like the field and how the junctions play in with it. With so many obstacles on the field, what do you guys think will be like the optimal drivetrain? Either like what wheels teams are going to use, what ratios, but also like what size. I think last year made people realize that small robots are very, very viable. Before that, I think we saw like a really, really small robot from like Small Stem back in Skystone. But other than that, I mean, people always just went 18 by 18 by 18 and just ran like the biggest robot they possibly could. But with this year, there is definitely less space. And I think something that was a really good point that I saw someone else say online was that even though like the poles, like the base of the poles is pretty small, as soon as you add cones around it, that base is going to get a lot bigger, so you're going to have less space. So how do you think that'll factor in the drivetrain design decisions?
I think in general with that, it's someone asked me the other day, and they're like, what's going to be like driving on the field? And this was before like all of the fields went out, and it was like they had just seen it, and they're like, imagine trying to shoot the gap from last year, but instead of just one spot on the field or two spots on the field, you need to shoot the gap. You need to shoot the gap everywhere on the field. So there is room for a full-size robot to fit in between two cones when they're scored on a junction. It is incredibly snug. So I imagine we'll see a lot of mobile, agile, smaller robots for this game.
Mm-hmm. And do you think like because of that Mecanum will we'll see a return to Mecanum, maybe some form of like Omni wheels or X drives or 6-wheel drive again, or Swerve, anything, like a lot of possibilities out there. So.
Yeah, for sure. Mecanum is going to be kind of king in this game, especially with needing a bunch of motors to deal with all the manipulation of these cones. Like Swerve would be cool. It's a pile of motors to make that happen. But Mecanum is kind of nice because it kind of drift around all these poles. I think most high-level robots are going to be equipped with those Mecanum wheels.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And before we get to the audience questions, let's draw for the giveaway. So, Tyler?
Yeah, once again, the keyword for that was green if you were interested in winning. That's for these compliant wheels. And if you do win, please make sure you shoot First Updates Now a message either on Twitch or on Discord. We need all your information to get something shipped out to you. And the winner of this is going to be Arc BL. Congratulations, Arc. Make sure you message me with your info once again. And Arc's won before, so they should know the routine. Thanks again to AndyMark. And we do have another giveaway from AndyMark. I promise you're going to want to stick around for. So more about that in a little bit. But let's head to some questions from our audience there, boss.
Yeah, Sahil, do you want to talk about the first one?
It's a little blurry on my side. You want to give it a go?
Sure. So, 123 says, is AndyMark going to release a slide kit or some sort of linear motion kit for FTC?
I could take that one. So I would definitely say yeah. I think Tyler was showing the one of our How Do I videos that released last week, and it kind of features a little bit our new slide kit that we're coming up with. Actually have it here in the back. So yeah, we do have something in the pipeline. That hopefully our fun fans will be able to see hopefully by this weekend.
Awesome. Yeah. And then next is Arc BL, who actually just won the giveaway, and they say, how do you see autos working out at high levels?
I think it's going to be kind of what we talked about earlier, where it's the game of chicken, right? Of who's going to actually secure at least the first cone on that high junction, and then who has the ability to deal with the fact that there's going to be traffic with two robots trying to go for that junction, or who's smart enough to realize that they're not fast enough to get that first cone, or they can't offset their cycles, and they're going to go, get a pile of cones on that medium junction that's to the left or the right. I think it's going to be kind of the meta there, and those conversations and games of chicken before those matches are going to be kind of fun, I think.
I think in terms of advanced autoplay, in terms of that chicken, it would be really neat to see if teams could use sensors to determine if the other alliance is trying to do something with that pole, so they can either wait or they can choose a different pole. I think that'd be a pretty neat thing to see from advanced teams.
I agree.
Yeah, and do you think we'll see like a lot of sensor integration with that? Like, do you think there's going to be some way teams can really reliably detect an opposing alliance robot trying to score, and then even more than that, detect when they've left like the junction area, when they're at the junction area? How likely do you think that is?
I think it's definitely possible. I mean, the all of the elements, at least you could rely on those of the presence of them, knowing that like it's a big yellow pole in your way. You can see if it's here or tilted. You can see these, bright contrasting color cones. At least like presence of an object is not what is expected. Seems like viable, vision-wise. Whereas like, I don't know, the fields are pretty standard, and seeing whether or not there's a robot nearby is possible, but also difficult because every robot looks different. But presence of game pieces is probably a good start, I think.
So you think we'll see? So you think we'll see more of like a vision-based approach to like robot avoidance rather than something like distance sensors or ultrasonic sensors or anything like that?
I think so, personally.
All right, and then 123 has another question. Does AndyMark have any input on the field design? I think we've talked about this a little bit, but we could probably expand on it. And also, is the GDC paid?
Can't tell you if the GDC is paid, but I do know that it's a collaborative group. Once we get to the AndyMark is right into the game stage, where they have pretty good solid ideas, but it has to be a collaborative process to make that dream a reality, both to make it manufacturable, but also the GDC did take a bunch of input from us as AndyMark this year, kind of back and forth early in that game design process to iterate together, probably more than we ever had before, and that was really a lot of fun. But yes, there is a two-way conversation there, which is really fun to be a part of.
All right, and then our last question for now is Creative Casey, who says, "How does one become a member of the game design team?"
That's a good question. I don't know if we're necessarily privy to that information on how to become a member of GDC.
How about becoming a member of AndyMark? Is there do you guys do internships? Are you hiring? How does that work?
Yeah. Every summer we usually take on a couple interns in different engineering departments. It's pretty competitive. We usually start looking in that spring time frame or so, or late fall. Usually have 1 or 2 mechanical interns that we expect availability in that late May, early June till mid-August time frame, and that's probably the easiest way, even though it's competitive. And we typically like to have interns that have at least 1 year of college, because we like to have our interns, our mechanical design interns at least, be local. And we like, a lot of them are not local to us, so they having some life experience of their first year of college under their belt, some practical knowledge, and the ability to live in Kokomo, Indiana is kind of a big deal for us because it's such a hands-on job.
Sure. Yeah, I think we have a couple more really good questions coming from the audience, so we'll go keep going with that. Creative Casey also asked, does a circuit always have to be moving towards a terminal, or can it start backtracking in the opposite direction before connecting to the terminal?
So I think I have an interpretation of the answer. So once again, we get kind of like the game concept for stuff, and here's the idea for the field. Let's make it. So we're not in charge of the rules for a lot of this. So the game design committee are going to be the ones that are going to have to do final rulings on stuff. Through my interpretation, I think that's fine. I think it's as long as you can create a snake in some manner from one terminal to the other. But that's a great question to potentially ask in the Q&A when that opens up.
Yeah, definitely. And I think our last question for now is Team123 says, do you take high school students for internships?
We do have some, we usually do have some local high school folks work with us in the summer, especially when we're kitting up all these first tech challenge fields, and after school as well. But for engineering internships, typically not. Typically, we like to have at least 1 year of college under their belt before they become an intern with us.
Sure. All right. Well, I think those are some great questions and great answers. Up next, we're going to talk about some new products. But before we do that, let's start another giveaway and bring on Tyler to talk more about a new sponsor.
Yeah, thanks, Abbas. Hey, let's start that giveaway first, right? And we got a couple. I told you we got a couple of great ones here. So we're actually AndyMark's giving away 2 things. They're giving away the AndyMark Goat, which I'll just switch over the screen so we can see Nick here. Fantastic. So AndyMark Goat, and also an AndyMark Goat electric goat T-shirt, which is really cool, by the way. So if you're interested in winning both of these, go ahead and type in the following keyword. What I put in here? Goat, just goat. Put goat in chat many times. So put goat in chat. That's your opportunity to win. Don't forget, you do have to be following in order to be eligible to win, and our subscribers get a little bit extra luck. Hey, as the boss said, we do have a new ad partner on board that we're delighted to have. Every time we do new ad partners, we want to make sure it's relevant to what our audience as well too, and that is our friends at Solidworks. So hey, FTC, there are some great teams out there that do 3D solid modeling for their robots, but there's not enough, and we got to get more teams on board. Did you know that you can get Solidworks, their entire platforms, for absolutely free? They have both platforms for desktop, or they now have their Cloud CAD apps that you can use as well. So you can either do file sharing through the cloud or do everything through a tab browser as well too. So if you're interested in learning more and getting Solidworks for free, head on over to solidworks.com/first. You can click apply to request your license. You can hop into the 3D experience area. They have people from Solidworks that will actually answer questions for you. Solidworks engineers that will do that, and you can get your license as well too. If you have a whole team that wants a whole group of licenses, have your one of your lead mentors handle the application process for that. But once again, it's absolutely free. You get accepted to it. This is software that is used by 80% of companies out there in the world as well too, and 80% of colleges and over 350,000 companies in the world use Solidworks. So if you want to use the 3D solid modeling software that is used in the world and used in industry, head on over to solidworks.com/first and get started. Get Solidworks for your team.
All right, now that we have all the giveaways done and the sponsors, the first thing I want to talk about is the mechanism wheel chassis that you guys are developing. And what are you guys like? I know it's like a really main topic because many teams would be like usually only getting them from GoBuilder, and now it's finally coming from AndyMark as like a key hint to what this game is. So what do you guys feel about that?
So yeah, with the new chassis, the last like perennial year-to-year chassis was the Tile Runner, and that one was designed at the very beginning of our involvement for FTC. So it was kind of specced out to be the full size of an FTC robot, um, and so the idea behind this one is a more compact style chassis that we imagine will be a lot more maneuverable for teams, and also a simpler construction. So there's less total number of parts on this, and it goes together pretty quickly. I think it took me about an hour to fully assemble one of these from a bunch of parts to fully ready to drive.
Hmm. And one thing I'm really interested in is how does like the product like design life cycle look like for the chassis? Like what iterations did you guys go through? Like what decisions did you guys make? I think one of them was definitely going with that smaller footprint, as you said. But I'm sure there were a lot of others.
Yeah, so I could feel this one too. So this is probably actually the fourth or fifth completely different revision of what we foresaw as a FTC chassis to come out with for this year. So early on, it starts as a hey, let's make a new, more efficient FTC chassis, and so that was one of those like, hey, we have a tile runner. What parts can we pull off of the tile runner so we don't have to try to make too many new things all at once? And we really just saw that if we wanted a really simple drivetrain, it needs to kind of be built from the ground up to be completely simple and kind of purpose built. And so that kind of led its way to some stuff that we pulled from our experience doing FRC. So like cantilevered shafts, we're using 3/8 hex shafts, so it's really easy to swap in and out wheels. You can try a bunch of different wheels to see, and then you don't have to take apart a whole drivetrain. On screen is we actually made an update to our existing HD Mecanum to be able to accept the hex wheel or the hex shaft. But someone dropped in the chat they saw one of our prototype BB wheels, which are coming out pretty soon, and that's like my baby right there. The BB is my baby.
Yeah, and real quick before we get onto those super cool ball bearing based Mecanum wheels, how about like not having that outside plate anymore? I remember with the tile runners, they were like super protected, very robust. There was no chance anything was going to hit those wheels. But now with no outside plate, do you think it will like? Do you think the wheels are going to be really endangered or anything like that, or will they just be completely fine?
I would say, Nick, you wanna
Yeah, I think it's gonna be okay. The shaft is 3/8 steel for part of that reason. So you're not gonna bend that shaft. Even driving full speed into poles and getting the wheels caught on them, not gonna be an issue. But both of our 3/8 hex Mecanum offerings have steel side plates. So I'm not really worried about any of those plates getting bent or damaged in normal FTC match play. And both of those wheels use actual like nuts and bolts to hold the axles in, so should be pretty stout. I'm not really worried about that being an issue. And there's plenty of support with that cantilever with the big 3/8 ID hex and round bearings in that. It's built like a brick for a reason. And us engineering folk at AndyMark have spent a lot of time running these chassis around the field to kind of beat the crap out of them to see if they'd withstand, and we've no issues whatsoever.
Yeah, and I think we've keep hinting about these new Mecanum wheels, but let's really get into them. The new BB Mecanum wheels seem really, really cool. Can you guys talk about them a bit? Specifically, what made you decide to create a new set of Mecanums? Why do you think these are really, really good for teams as an option, and what do you really like about them?
I think my favorite part about them are they're narrower. So our current option for an HD wheel is about 2 inches wide. And so this new wheel is 1.5 inches wide. So you're going to save about a total of 1 inch on your robot's width, which, especially for a game like this where you're trying to make a more nimble, narrow, or a smaller robot, that width is really important. Additionally, our current HD wheel uses a bushing style setup, and so the BB goes for ball bearing. So all of these rollers have ball bearings in them, so they're really smooth. I was looking for my prototype that I had. Some of the rollers are so smooth you could like use a can of air to just spray them, and like it would spin for quite a while. So we're really excited. We're hoping that the community is also excited when those do come out.
Yeah. And what was like the biggest challenge you had when designing these new wheels?
I think right now the big challenge is like every time you have a really great idea for these, you're like, how do you make it narrower? And making it narrower changes a bunch of other parameters, and so you're like constantly iterating, trying to make it narrower. And that's why it has as many rollers as it does, is to make it smooth and narrower. It necessitated more rollers. So I think it's probably got the most rollers of any mechanical wheel that's going to be out on the market.
Yeah, and with that, does that mean it's just going to be like super smooth sideways, or are we going to see like maybe reduced traction with that, or what are like the advantages and disadvantages of having more rollers?
Hopefully less squeak. Sometimes wheels get squeaky. With more rollers, there's less gap in between each of them, so there's less likely chance you're going to get things stuck up in there. And so we're really excited to see those come out.
Yeah, and one last thing about them before we get to some audience questions. Are you able to paint the side plates? I think that's something that teams have really like leaned into in the past couple of years. Is that something we'll see, purple, yellow, green, AndyMark BB mechanical wheels?
I don't know if we would paint them, no, but
yeah. If there's like enough community demand, like we could look into that. We typically haven't done a lot of that for like the wheel products. We've done anodized aluminum lengths of our extrusion based on community feedback. If there's like super strong community need for that, they could be powder coated. That's a thing we could do, but at some cost.
Yeah, I think I'm going to phrase my question improperly. But like, can someone take apart the wheels, paint the steel side plates, and then put it back together? No issues at all.
Yeah, so the wheels are actually going to ship as an unassembled kit. So if you want to do that before you don't have to take them apart because it's already a bag of parts for you.
Yeah.
As my goat falls, they're no problem to paint those whatsoever.
Awesome.
Yes,
yeah,
you could even make them all black if you wanted to. I see that in the chat.
Cool. And then Binary MC says, question about the BB mechanical wheels. How well would they handle a 60-pound robot, or even extending that 80, 100-pound robot?
So a lot of the architecture in terms of plate loading is going to be very similar to our current wheel, and they handle FRC robots all the time. So we're pretty confident that we're going to see a similar load rating, about 50 to 60 pounds a wheel, at least.
Awesome. Yeah, and I don't think there is a weight limit this year, so hopefully no one will try pushing that limit, but you never know. We saw some pretty heavy robots back in the electric recovery and older years.
Yeah, so the next product that I found very interesting is the compact linear slide kit. That's definitely something that many teams want, and I can see it being used in this game a lot. So what are you guys' thoughts about that?
So this one kind of stemmed from a missing link in our product design library. So here we've got it in the background. This is the 3-stage version. So it go like almost a little over 3 feet high up in the air. We're gonna have a lot of different sizes available, but it's essentially just something like we didn't have a good solution already, and if you look at just about every first game, there's been a lifting component of some sort. Even the shooting games had a lifting component of some sort. So we just saw a need to come up with something to fill that need. And one of the things we're featuring on these are slides that a lot of teams have struggled getting before. A lot of teams have struggled ordering the Zoomy slides. So we're happy to be able to provide a product using quality components that are just going to work.
Hey guys, I know you don't have a page up for that yet, but what's the ETA for that kit to come out?
Product page should be up, I think, by this weekend.
But for the actual kit to be available for shipping,
I think we're still targeting October release for most of these things.
And just over 3 feet is convenient when the poles are or when the junctions are 33.5 inches high for the high junction. So hopefully teams can get some really good use out of that.
There's one feature I really do want to highlight in that kit. Peyton did like pretty much all the engineering work on a lot of products we're talking about tonight, but the carrier, the white piece of plastic in the center of that kit, that holds the basically lets the Misumi slides bolt together, but also it holds all of the bearing riggings or the pulleys for all the bearings in it. It's kind of this one magical all-inclusive part that really is kind of the centerpiece of this kit that I think is a really, really nice add. That it's pretty easy to manufacture, so it's not super high cost, but it makes it way easy to put this together. It's basically just take this white piece of plastic that already has some inserts, pre-installed into it, add your bearings to it, and bolt the slides together. It goes together really fast, and I think it's a really big value add, that piece of machine plastic.
Yeah. I mean, I'm super excited. And Binary MC is asking in the chat, so are the slides that are in the compact slide kit Misumi slides, or are they just like similar to Misumi?
So we wanted to make sure we used a high quality product that teams were already familiar with. So that's what we looked at first. So when the product pages go live, it'll have more definition on all of that. I don't want to spoil too much going forward, but yeah, be sure to keep an eye out for that. Hopefully by Friday or this weekend.
Awesome. Yeah. And let's get on to another product, the 3-inch stealth wheels. So, we've seen a lot of wheels from AndyMark, the 4-inch, the 2-inch, the sushi rollers, and everything. Where do you think like these 3-inch stealth wheels fit, and like how are they? What applications are they better than the current offerings?
Yeah, so the 3-inch stealth wheel was kind of just a hole we noticed in our line. They were designed, I think, 6 or 7 years ago at this point, and it was just, we sell 2 4-inch wheels, 6-inch wheels, and they just never really a priority. Once we sold the 3-inch compliant wheels, we had a lot of people ask us, okay, I like this 3-inch design. I want something that's hard for maybe a really small compact drivetrain, or for those mechanisms where you want about that 3-inch size, but you hard wheel, you don't want to deal with compliant wheel for those. So they come in all of our bores, the 5mm hex, the 8mm nub bore, the typical 3/8 and 1/2-inch hex bores. So they're usable for, both FRC and FTC robots. Kind of pretty much anywhere you'd use a 2-inch or a 4-inch stealth wheel is where we anticipate them seeing. It's kind of a no-brainer. It's like, this is a hole. We should make these.
Yeah, definitely. And especially this year, do you think we'll see a lot of teams going for these with, using to collect the cones, or do you think we'll see like a different type of wheel from AndyMark being more in use there?
I can see that. The cones are pretty hard. So if teams are looking at using wheeled intakes, I expect to see more of the either Entraption stars or, the compliant wheels that we sell, because the cone is so, rigid. But if they build that compliance into, the arms that are holding the wheels, then yes, of course, because they're a nice packaging size and they're really grippy, especially those 35A green ones. I can see that there for sure.
Got it.
We put green compliant wheels on like every prototype when we were first testing stuff in this field. Like, especially, that video that Tyler had playing earlier, there's like probably like 5 or 6 compliant wheels on like every intake we tried. So.
Yeah, and Sahil, you want to go on to the last products we want to talk about?
Yeah, so the last product is an adapter from HD Nubs to 6mm D hex adapters.
Yeah, so for years we've had a variety of these hub, or we call them nubs, that were made from a long extrusion, chopped up on a lathe, and then broached, and they were fine, but they were a little bit difficult to thread the screws into because it was just kind of a raw extrusion with some tabs. So this is actually a pandemic land product where we're all working from home, and it's like we should update our nubs. So as we're all working remotely, we went through.
Yes, please buy 999.
Please buy them. We went through and basically just kind of updated these so that they're all fully machined with threaded holes in the corners. And the big deal about them though is the tolerances of the bores are a lot better and a lot tighter, so they're not as sloppy or loose or eccentric as some of our older ones are. They're basically just a lot higher quality for a pretty competitive price for the HD nubs. The hex adapters I'm a big fan of because I like using hex shafts everywhere on robots. So they We have both a 1/2-inch outer diameter style and a 3/8 outer diameter style with a 6mm D hole in them. What's kind of neat about those is they're fully machined and then wire EDM'd to do that 6mm D profile. So it's nice, super tight tolerance with a pretty large, beefy set screw on kind of the shoulder region of it to lock it into that shaft with a 1/4-20 tapped end in the end. What's kind of silly about that is they do the 6mm D hole, and then they just like run a tap into it for that 1/4-20 thing to keep things on the shaft. Big fan of those. They're usable both on FRC, FTC robots for a variety of 6mm D to hex needs.
Yeah, no, that's really cool, and I think really good adapters that just won't strip or anything like that will be really important this year, especially with like all the rotating mechanisms and arms and high torque situations that teams are thinking about. Yeah, all right. I think we're ready to wrap up. Sahil, do you want to start the outro?
Yeah. So for social media, thank you for all the follows and subscriptions we received today. Don't forget that you can subscribe for free if your parents have Amazon Prime. We hope you enjoy this episode of FTC Recap. If you wanted to stay connected with the first updates now, FTC is doing. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram with the handle @FunFTC and join our Discord through the link in the chat.
Yeah, and before we leave, let's draw for that last giveaway with the GOAT and the GOAT shirt.
Yeah, so once again, it's the GOAT and the electric GOAT shirt. So I don't know if you get the one off of Nick's head necessarily, but you'll get one of them for sure sent out to you. The winner of that is going to be Ryan DeLeon. Congratulations, Ryan. Make sure you shoot first updates now message so we can get that out to you. And thanks again to AndyMark for the awesome giveaways today, guys. Really do appreciate it. And can't wait to see what's coming out of POWERPLay for the whole season. Good luck to all the teams.
Yeah, and on behalf of myself, Sahil, Peyton, Nick, and our producer Tyler working behind the scenes, I'd like to thank you all for tuning in tonight. Bye.
This video on First Updates Now is made possible by viewers like you and also the following sponsors. Apply the skills you gained as a first student or mentor and help change the world at Stryker. Stryker is a top career choice for many of those in FIRST because of their commitment to innovation and saving lives. Learn more about the incredible culture at Stryker and view their thousands of positions available around the world at careers.stryker.com. Solidworks is free for FIRST teams. Over 80% of U.S. engineering schools and 370,000 plus companies use Solidworks to design great products. Solidworks can help you design a great robot on desktop or on the cloud. Go to solidworks.com/first to register your team. Thanks for watching. If you want to join us for future fun streams, be sure to click the follow button and turn on the notification bell to know when we're live. Keep the conversation going and provide your input to our content. View archives and unique content at youtube.com/firstupdatesnow. Join our Discord at discord.gg/firstupdatesnow and check out Fun FTC on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and First Updates Now on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter.